So one of the things I really like doing is I don't watch much mainstream media, but I do like debates. I like the shows where people are talking with people that disagree with them. And I think the person who does this best on the mainstream media is Tucker Carlson. Even though I don't watch him all the time, sometimes I watch the debates and I find myself watching the TV like, hey, I would say this, I would say that. So I'm going to try to do some more videos like this in the future. This video in particular, what we're going to be looking at is Tucker discussing a woman who's running for council in New York, I believe he'll say here. And they're discussing the importance of personal responsibility when it comes to climate change. This is a big beef I always have. All these people that talk about how we need to do things, whether it be on immigration, climate change, they prescribe prescriptions that they themselves don't live by. So, for example, we have Bernie Sanders, Al Gore, Leo DiCaprio telling us all how terrible we are for our carbon footprint and how we need to change our policies. Meanwhile, they're flying around in private jets, having second, third homes, having a bigger carbon footprint in 1 year than we'll have our entire lives. And it's hypocritical. So Tucker's going to point this out, and I want to discuss the reaction that this woman has when he suggests personal responsibility. So here we go. I'll play a little of the clip.
And why would they be? Namiki Konst is a candidate for New York City public advocate, and she joins us today. Namiki, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hi, Tucker. How you doing?
I'm great. But I'm a little bit confused. So mostly debates about climate change are one person saying it's real, and the other one's like, we don't really have all the evidence. Granted, I grant everything you say about climate change. I'm just for the sake of this conversation.
Thank you. That's a start.
Yeah, well, okay.
You admit.
But if you really believe what you're saying, and if Bernie Sanders really believes what he's saying, why is he flying on private planes? I mean.
Now, you would expect her to say, yeah, that's not a good thing. We could all try to do better, but, we need to adjust policies. That would be a consistent, logical way to explain this. A similar conversation you can have with immigration. Look, if you believe in open borders, why do you live in gated communities? And the answer, if you're trying to be logically consistent, is like, yeah, we could all do better, but we need to change policy. So let's see what this woman has to say.
And it's a sincere question.
So let's not get distracted from the real issue here.
No, stop. I'm not going to let you off that easily. Why is it not a real issue? If climate change, as Katie Church told us, is really the only issue that matters, then why aren't we living like it's the only issue that matters?
Because it really comes down to the industry. If the industry wants to make planes that exist off of renewable energy rather than oil and gas, then we will all be able to live on this planet. It starts at the industry level, not the consumer. It's really not fair to put a tax on the individual.
It's not fair for someone who's telling us the planet's being destroyed to live in a way that suggests that he actually believes the planet's being destroyed. So I honestly really don't get it. So if you're Al Gore and you say, nothing is more important than climate change, I'm a better person than you are because I care more than you. By the way, I have one of the largest houses in Nashville and I fly private and I take a Suburban to the private airport, to the FBO. Why should I be okay? Sincerely, why is that okay?
Not going to individual choices are not going to solve the disaster that we are facing. We already have a migration issue. We already have flooding. We already have hurricanes that have hit Puerto Rico, have hit New Orleans, have hit Florida, and have displaced so many working people. This is an industry change. We have to cap emissions globally.
But hold on.
And if we don't cap emissions with big industries and policy, then those.
So notice she's not really saying anything. She's just going off on talking points, but she'll make it quite clear in a little bit what she's alluding to here, where she says the individual doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what me and you do as individuals. What matters is what the government forces industry to do. And she'll admit later that she's a democratic socialist. Don't be fooled. Democratic socialism is just socialism under a different name, and this is their mantra. Individuals don't matter, only the collective matters. And that's fundamentally what's wrong with the entire system. That's what justifies all sorts of abuses that we saw in the Soviet Union and we saw in China, because your individual liberty no longer matters. All that matters is the greater good. So they say, so you see her advocating, there is no contradiction whatsoever in saying that poor people need to pay more for gasoline, that poor and middle class people need to do more based on these policies that would cap emissions and things like that. They need to pay more. Meanwhile, us as the wealthy are allowed to use whatever fossil fuels we want. Once it then becomes convenient for she'll later talk about, we could have solar-powered airplanes or battery-powered airplanes. So what she's saying is, I'm not going to change my lifestyle. Why? That doesn't matter whatsoever. All that matters is that I'm a great person because I'm saying the government should force businesses to do other things. This proves kind of the insanity of socialism and the insanity of this position. That's how they get away with doing the very things that they criticize. They're above it. As individuals, it doesn't matter if they live wholesome lives. Now think of what's saying. Tucker's right here. I think he could do a slightly better job illustrating, but it's really hard. I have to remind myself. It's easy in retrospect watching an interview like this to say, oh, here's exactly what I said. Tucker's doing it live, and I think he does a pretty good job. But what he needs to hammer down on the fact is so look, what you're in effect saying is that your individual consequence, that you think that the most important thing in life is climate change and that we're all going to be dead soon if we don't change it. But you are personally allowed to act like it doesn't matter because you don't feel that you as an individual should be held to the same standard that you think these businesses should be held to. If every single person thinks like that, then of course nothing will change, right? This would be the equivalent of saying, I think we all need to give money to the poor, but I personally choose not to give money to the poor. I think that the government should force other people to give money to the poor. Oh, and I also find myself to be morally superior to other people that don't agree with me. It has nothing to do with morality. Morality are choices that you make voluntarily that and act in goodwill or act in a moral fashion. If the government forces you to give money to someone, you're not moral for giving that money. Nor are you moral for saying the government should force other people to give money, but you yourself keeping your money. It's the same true with climate change. This is insanity. The reason that the West is the best, the reason that the United States is the greatest country in the history of the world, the idea of it is because it was a society that focused on the individual and individual liberty. What these democratic socialists are trying to say, is illustrated in this comment, is they're trying to say the individual doesn't matter at all. And you'll see her references here in a second. Let's go a little
Individual choices mean nothing.
Okay, well, first of all, hold on. First of all, individual choices always mean something.
In a libertarian fantasy world,
no,
sure.
I'm not.
You see, individual choices only matter in a libertarian fantasy world. That's how these people think. That's how they're able to justify things such as they don't care. They'll justify all sorts of abuses done by individuals. They don't care. They'll defend those because they're only concerned with the collective and groups. That's why your individual identity doesn't matter. All that matters is your group identity, what race you are, what gender you are. In this case, all that matters is the government should tell it's businesses that are a problem. Individuals aren't the problem. It's not individuals like Bernie Sanders that's using, that's hypocritical and saying, we need to curb fossil fuel emissions while using more than me and you'll ever use in a lifetime in 1 year. That's not hypocritical to them. It's perfectly okay for them to live by this double standards. It's rules for you and not for them. And this is the entire problem. That's why nothing will ever change. That's why the lead into this segment was Tucker showing about the riots in Paris. Because people understand, the working class people realize, wait a minute, we're getting screwed. Right? Now, I'll further jump in when she starts talking about emissions. But remember, that's the key point I'm trying to make. This ideology is an ideology saying individual responsibility means nothing. And that is the antithesis of what makes us a great country and how we should act in a moral environment.
I'm not a libertarian and I'm not living in a fantasy world. In real life, individual choices matter, or else what's the point of any of this, okay? So it does start with, liberals used to say it starts with one person. I guess they don't anymore because they don't want to be held to their own standards. But the solutions are always like, ordinary working people ought to pay higher gas taxes.
Not the solution at all. And actually, we're against that. Progressives versus the neoliberals and neocons. Progressives understand that this needs to be a huge policy change. The place where we are right now, if we increase the temperature 1 degree, you and I won't be living in D.C. and New York anymore.
Okay, but
we will be just...
I'd like to see the science for that. There are scientists all over the map that say how much things will increase. I've seen it say that temperatures in the next 100 years could go up 1.5 degrees. I've seen that vary. I haven't seen the study she's referencing that says a 1 degree increase in temperature over time will mean that New York and D.C. will no longer exist. I guess I would like to see that evidence. When is she proposing that would happen? How are her proposed solutions? Excuse me. When will those proposed solutions she's offering take effect? How much will they decrease the emissions? Things like that. Instead, she just wants to. It's a very unscientific way of talking. She just wants to say, "Oh no! This is the way it is. We're all gonna be dead in 1%. So we have to just act." And she's failing to look like the Paris riots show and protests show. She's failing to look at the consequences of her solutions. She just acts like, no. No one should have to pay more. It's all businesses. Businesses will pay more. We'll make them cap their emissions, and it won't cost anyone else an increase in set. That's absolute garbage. We know it is. The cost is going to be passed on to people one way or another. Businesses, you can't force them to operate at a loss. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, now we're being taxed 500 times what we were before, but we're still going to put out renewable energy that we can't make a profit of. They'll just say, fine, we'll close our doors, we'll do something else. Now no one has energy. But she glosses over all that. She goes, no, it'll be a perfect world. And she's the one accusing Tucker of saying we should have personal responsibility. She says that's living in a fantasy world. Well, what kind of fantasy world is she living in where she says, no, we should end fossil fuel use and still it'll be just as cheap, if not cheaper, for the people. The price will never go up for them. It's absolutely absurd.
No, I want to talk about the public policy. Okay, yes, I want to talk about the public policy solutions that will flow from the predictions that you're making. Is there any solution you've ever heard of that doesn't increase the price of energy? I've never heard of one.
Well, okay, so if you're going to be focused on the price of energy, we're not going to have a planet in 10 years.
Hold on.
So now she's claiming that we're all going to be dead in 10 years. Do you see how absurd this is? Where's her science? Where's her backing up this? Do you know any credible? I've yet to see a credible scientist that says, like they always say, oh, it's the consensus of all scientists. It's the consensus of all scientists. Please show me the consensus that we're all dead in 10 years based on climate change. I've yet to see that. But it doesn't matter. She's pretending to operate from a position of science and logic, but she's not. She's operating on purely emotional and irrational positions. That's why she says things like individual responsibility doesn't matter. But this is what progressivism and socialism leads to. And she just poo-poos the fact that people will have to pay more for energy. Again, showing that she doesn't care. Well, let's look at a place like India. India, the life expectancy in India has shot through the roof in the past 20 years. And much of the reason is people that never had access to stable energy now do. Now, granted, most of it's dirty. They don't have a great infrastructure right now. Most of it's coal or sometimes even generator gasoline powered. But still, that's the only energy these people can afford because it's so cheap right now. The renewables that she would like to lead to sounds great, but we don't have access to those right now. It'll take years to get there. She doesn't care at all that her plans would mean that these poor people that can only afford the cheap fossil fuels right now would just be out of luck. She doesn't care because in her head, so what? We're all dead in 10 years anyway, so screw those poor people. It doesn't matter if her and Bernie are flying around on jets. Those poor people have to pay more. This is why this mindset, it not only would it not work, but how it's so immoral. That's why personal responsibility does matter. If you're going to demand that these people at the lowest edges have to suffer and their life expectancy be destroyed because they no longer have access to simple energy, then the least you could be doing is trying to curb your extravagant lifestyle. But no, she sees no problem with that.
Wait, hold on. I thought you cared about working people.
We're going down a rabbit hole.
La. Yeah, that sums up her argument perfectly, right?
I want to talk about the solutions. A solution would be a Green New Deal, moving to 100% renewable energy, forcing the companies that are jacking up the prices on working people to actually reduce their emissions so that
100% renewable energy. In other words, no fossil fuels. She doesn't give a time frame for that. Clearly, it has to be within 10 years because we're all dead in 10 years, according to her. Do you understand how the entire economy of the world would collapse immediately if we got rid of fossil fuels? It's not even worth, this isn't even remotely feasible, but she's of the utmost confidence that she's logically correct and morally correct. And meanwhile, she has the solution, the way to solve almost every problem is to start with yourself and have personal responsibility, and then start reaching out from them. But she's the antithesis of that. She doesn't believe she has any personal responsibility, and she has these illogical plans that says we should just stop using all fossil fuels and everything will work out. Now, she's going to talk about how this Green New Deal, which is just, again, what does that mean? That's like saying peace and love. Yeah, I get it. It's a cliche, but what are the details of it? What will it do for prices? How long will it take to solve? Just saying fuzzy, lovey words doesn't change anything. Like, it's nice to say we should eliminate all student debt. Everyone should have free college. Everyone should have free Medicare. Okay, but we need to discuss where this stuff comes from. That's fine. I don't mind having the conversation. But then when you try to have the conversation, they're just like, you're immoral. It doesn't matter. And they don't believe in individual responsibility anyways. So it's always the government needs to be our father. We need to give everything to the government and leave them come up with the correct solutions. Only that is the moral thing to do. Us operating individual with individual responsibility is immoral. That's a terrible system because we know when we give that power to the government, they will inevitably be corrupt or inefficient. That's why this is so bad. That's why personal responsibility and personal action always solves things better. Even if it's not perfect, it's going to be better at solving. So let's listen.
People aren't displaced, so working people don't have to pay the cost of hurricane damage and have clean water, and the water's not being privatized.
Volume is not the same as an argument, okay? So just really simple question.
You don't like opinionated women, do you?
And they're, furthermore, the progressive. Tucker's trying to say when she's saying things like, la, 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 and we want clean water, and we think that everyone should be good, and we think that businesses are bad, and we think that hurricanes are bad, and we think that fires are bad, and Tucker's like, whoa, just because you're talking loud doesn't mean that you're, like, saying the truth. Her response to her being childish and him calling her out on that is, you don't like opinionated women, do you? Because, again, it's not about individuals, it's all about the group. If Tucker has a problem with her, he must have a problem with her group identities, one of which is women. So Tucker doesn't like women. This is the absurd argumentation you get from people that are progressives like this.
I live with four.
Volume.
You're not getting. Oh, you're a
You're
sexist.
pretty loud. My earpiece is blaring right now.
Let me just ask you a really simple question. Would the solutions that you're espousing now, would they raise the price of gasoline for wage earners, the ones
Not
you
with
claim
the
to
Green
care
New Deal.
about?
I'm actually
Gas would be the same price.
I am against raising consumer prices. That is a neoliberal design. I am a democratic socialist. I think we should pass policies and actually make rich people, millionaires and billionaires and corporations, pay taxes. That's the problem. No one at the top is paying taxes.
It's not true at all. Actually, the majority of taxes do come from extremely wealthy. That's why when we talk about tax cuts, people always say, oh, it's tax cuts for the rich. Well, the rich pay the majority of taxes. Does that mean that they shouldn't? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that is the abject fact. That's reality. And for people like her, she said, nah, the rich don't pay any taxes. That's not true at all. They might use loopholes to not pay as much as she thinks they should, or she might think the rate on them should be higher. That's fine. Those are reasonable arguments. But to just blatantly claim, oh, the rich don't pay any taxes is ignorant, and it's not in reality. In addition, she's continuing to operate under this assumption that people like Bernie seem to, whereas we could just take, like, the rich are this infinite pool of money we could take from, and there will be no consequences for that. But that's not the way economics work. If we have tax rates that are so exorbitantly high to pay for all these things she wants, for example, she thinks that energy prices will remain the exact same while fossil fuel use is completely eliminated. So somehow these businesses that operate in energy, like your coal power plants and other places like that, will have to cease operating immediately, totally change their operating procedures to use renewables, some of which aren't even developed yet, and that our prices won't go up. That is so naive, it's ridiculous. Like, anyone with the simplest understanding of an economics could see, like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not true at all. Now, you could make this argument that she's making in a cost-benefit way, right? You could say, look, we need to have a transition to renewables, and that means that we need to raise prices for fossil fuels right now by having a tax on them. Because what happens is, as long as fossil fuels are cheap, that means that renewables, if they would cost more to be able to sell, companies won't invest in these renewables. The reason is companies are trying to make money and they're trying to sell a product. And if I operate a gas station and I want to change my gas station to operating off like hydrogen fuel cells, and it will take the consumers will now have to pay $6 a gallon instead of the $2.70 or whatever they're paying now, no one will stop at my gas station because no one wants to pay double for fuel. Therefore, it's not profitable for me to try to switch to these hydrogen fuel cells. So the only way to make it feasible is to raise gas prices, fossil fuel prices. That's the only way to make it feasible. When you start capping emissions and things like that, I mean, think about it. If you own a business and now the government comes in and says, okay, now we're going to tax your business, so it's going to cost you 3 times as much now to operate, you're not just going to continue to operate at a loss. You're either going to shut down, which means that tons of people will lose their access to energy, or you're going to pass that cost on to the consumer. That's just the way things work. The other option is that somehow we subsidize that with massive tax increases, but now we're talking, instead of paying 3 times as much as at the pump, you're paying 3 times as much in gases. Clearly, this isn't a popular position. That's why people in Paris are rioting, because gas costs got to over $7 a gallon. But she's so naive. She just lives in this world where economics, and these aren't difficult economic principles. I'm just some bumbling fat guy. It's not like I'm an economic major or someone who deals with the economy in my job or anything like that. This is simple stuff you learn in high school. You can't raise prices on businesses and expect them not to pass it on. There's not an infinite pool of money to tax the rich. That's not how things work. So as much as she just wants to say things like Green New Deal, this is nothing. It's like saying love conquers all. Great, sounds good. What is the actual applications of this in real life? She has none. Let's hear from it.
But you would allow private planes to fly, I guess, right?
I think private planes have an obligation to change their standards. That is what policy is all about.
So private planes have an obligation to change their standards. So if you're the person using the private plane, like Bernie or her, presumably, or Al Gore, that's totally fine. That's not you being unethical at all. It's the person who made the plane that's unethical. Do you see how silly this is? So she's saying like, oh, Bernie can't help himself. If the plane's there, he has to use it. It's the people that made the plane that are terrible people. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just an excuse for her and people like her to shirk responsibility and always blame someone else while she feels morally superior.
Did it regulate water? Solar private plane? I mean, I don't know how that would function, but I think that there are other efficient forms of energy.
Energy use. Really quick, just for fun, name a renewable energy source that could power an airplane.
Well, I mean, we see it with cars.
No, I'm seriously.
Charge. I mean, there are. Do you know what a Prius is and a Tesla is? You could do.
Oh, a Prius. So we're going to have Prius airplanes. Well, I believe Prius still use some form of fossil fuel energy, correct? Like, for one, they have oil in them. I shouldn't speak because I don't really know. I don't know that they're totally electric, though. But even if they are, how does she have a model that shows that we could fly, like, large private planes in that method? Or even better, what about commercial jets that are holding 100 people? Do we have any evidence that electric could do that? Surely, if it'd be profitable, someone would have done it by now. The amount of energy that these flights use is immense. The first step to take that would be the most reasonable would be to have people stop using private flights unless they absolutely need to. But she says, no, we should shirk that personal responsibility. That doesn't matter. Instead, we should wait for these imaginary planes. It's the plane manufacturer's fault for not being technologically efficient enough or smart enough to come up with solar-powered or electronic planes. Not the person who's using the gasoline on the plane. They're not at fault at all. Do you see how stupid this sounds?
No, they could power an airplane, an electric airplane, a big electric airplane.
I mean, I'm no engineer, but I have heard of electric...
She is no engineer, that's true.
Cars and airplanes and other forms of electric solutions. Okay. I mean, there's also solar generated so that the electricity that you're charging with is solar energy.
We're back to the solar
generated. Or wind generated.
I'd be psyched for that. Text me a picture if you find one on the internet. And Mickey, thank you very much. Great to see you.
We have to solve this problem. You can't live in another
planet. It's so funny. It's so cringeworthy. She has no idea what she's talking about. Now, granted, you might be saying, okay, that's just one person, but this is kind of the mentality of a lot of the democratic socialists like Bernie. No personal responsibility. And in fact, we know it's like Bernie because he has several houses. He flies in private jets. He uses a bigger fossil footprint. He doesn't have a problem with that. See, his life has meaning because he's better than you. He's moral. So it's okay for him to do these things. It's you that needs to change. It's the businesses that need to change. And a lot of times when you listen to these progressives, like, listen to the people complain about the 1%. Almost all of them are in the 1%. That's the irony of it. What they really mean is the amount of money and the amount of things I do that have an impact on this earth is totally acceptable. It's the people slightly above me. They're the real problem. But what if some poor person would say, no, you're way up there, you're the problem. No, I'm good. That poor person doesn't understand. My level's good. With what I make and the energy I expend, all that's okay. That's totally acceptable. It's those people right above me. They're the problem. It just leads to tribal warfare. Look, it leads to exactly the situations we saw in the Soviet Union where you had, read like the Gulag Archipelago, where you had the kulaks who were these small-time farmers. They weren't wealthy people. They just owned farmers in these little towns. The Bolsheviks come in and convince all the people below them, it's those people that own the farms that are a problem. And so they ran them out of town or murdered them, and all of a sudden 50 million Ukrainians starved to death, or maybe it's 5 million. It's a big difference, I know. But they starved to death because no one knows how to operate the farm. The logic, the real world, and the reality of it doesn't matter. All that matters is the tribal grouping. That's it. And so I advocate strongly that clearly that this woman, I don't think is competent to understand what she's talking about. And I don't think that she's more moral than anyone just because she beats her chest and says that somehow she's concerned more about the earth. She doesn't have her facts straight. She has nothing to back them up. And she doesn't even have the most remote understanding of economics. And I think this is a problem with a lot of the kind of progressive social democrat movement that we see today. I think there are reasonable discussions we can have that would lead to gradually implementing maybe some of the policies they want. I would disagree with them, but surely reasonable people could have a discussion on this. But we're all dead in 10 years. We need to end fossil fuels, and we can do that without increasing the price to consumers whatsoever. That's absurd. And the most absurd thing is this idea that somehow we don't have any personal responsibility, and advocating for personal responsibility is living in a fantasy land. So this is the first video I did like this, so hopefully it turned out well. If you have any suggestions for me of what I could do, please leave them below. Please like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll be doing a live stream Friday. Every Friday I do them. Starting at noon Eastern time in the U.S. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot. Have a good one.